Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here to talk about probably one of my most anticipated films of the year, The Creator. It just hit theaters. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So AI technology can do a lot of things, maybe more than we even want it to do, but one of the things it can't do is stop me from getting sick. So you'll have to bear with me, my voice is a little off. I've been super sick this week, but I didn't want to miss this review because really since I saw the first trailer for this movie, it was one that that instantly put it up near the top of this films I was looking forward to because it looked very much like an answer, like an antidote to some of the like a counterpoint to the criticisms that a lot of audiences have had towards Hollywood, that there's just no originality and it's just sort of superhero movies and sequels. And this very much is an original story. It's not a sequel. It's not connected to anything. So I was excited for this. And it's also directed by Gareth Edwards, this is his first movie since the 2016 Rogue One, a Star Wars story, which really, in hindsight, I think was probably the best of like the kind of the Disney era of Star Wars movies. So I was very excited for this, for The Creator. And the Creator itself, if you haven't seen the trailers, it's a sci-fi story kind of set in the not too distant future. I think like 2065 or somewhere around, a couple of decades from now, and kind of takes place right in the middle of a human versus AI war. And sort of this ongoing conflict that we sort of drop into like the middle of that. And obviously, if you guys are big movie fans, you know that like AI, the battle against AI and the dangers isn't necessarily on its own like a super novel thing anymore. Even like Tom Cruise and the latest Mission Impossible movies taking on AI, kind of that. The premise of AI itself isn't super original, but Gareth Edwards manages to take the somewhat kind of familiar concept and just make the most of it and kind of weave it into something that is very, does feel very fresh. And to that end, I think The Creator is really probably one of the most immersive and inventive films of the year. I think it's a visual treat. It's a gorgeous looking film. It's an exciting film. It's a film that does have some kind of earned emotional stakes. And I do think there are some kind of interesting thematic stuff that we'll get into as well. Maybe we'll start with the visuals. I think despite having kind of a more modest budget, relatively speaking, compared to some of the more like the Marvel movies or some like the real big summer blockbusters, this film looks incredible. The cinematography in this thing, I don't know exactly who the cinematographer was for this, but it looks incredible, obviously with sort of more limited resources, but there's some excellent shots. There's some just like beautiful scenes, just the way that things are framed, and even like the design of these sort of AI simulate robots. And there's like the sort of this like Death Star like the Nomad, this like destroying massive weapon of war. There's some of the design elements of this are almost instantly kind of iconic and recognizable and definitely effective in that way. And kind of related, I think, to kind of building off of the visuals is this the world building, which is also I think just kind of equally engrossing in a very sort of show don't tell sense. There's a lot of sort of visual cues and kind of interesting stuff going on that as a viewer, you kind of get hints of what this world looks like, several decades into the future when AI has sort of become a fixture in sort of our daily life. But the film never gets bogged down in just sort of long exposition dumps and just trying to explain everything and give the whole backstory. There's a little bit of that in the opening sequence of this film, which sort of catches you up to speed of what's going on. But really from there, it just sort of throws you into this world, which feels very kind of lived in. You're definitely getting some like Blade Runner type vibes, especially in more like the city, kind of cosmopolitan set pieces of this. And I think another thing that director Gareth Edwards does really well in this movie, which is something that he also did with his Godzilla film several years ago, as well as like his initial like indie Monsters, sort of his debut film, which is to keep the action of this very grounded from the perspective of the actual characters, without kind of getting lost in like the big global spectacle scope of sort of the war, because there are in this film there's a big war going on. There's a lot of bigger stakes and but it never becomes about that, where there's this sort of faceless soldiers and government sending planes, and because the film really does focus pretty narrowly in, sometimes almost frustratingly narrow on these characters' journeys rather than sort of the big spectacle of that. And speaking of the characters, John David Washington is kind of the lead character in this, and he's superb. He's awesome, like he was in Tenet. He can definitely carry this film. And he's paired with Madeline Yuna Voiles, who is making her very first kind of child actress, making her very first kind of on-screen appearance. And she is awesome as well. You know, sometimes child actors can be a little hit or miss, but she is great in this film, and really their relational dynamic is the heart of this film, and kind of has a lot of the emotional stakes that get you invested in the story. And I will say that this isn't necessarily a perfect film. There are some kind of plot elements that I do think kind of leave some messy ends. I think thematically, and we'll get into some of that in a second, the film does touch on some very interesting and engaging questions, but it doesn't always pursue them deep enough to where they really make an impact or kind of get you thinking. And I think also some of the, especially in the third act, I found there are some like plot points that happen that just seem kind of illogical. Sort of the first two acts very much grounded in realism, again, relatively speaking for a science fiction film, kind of more expected, logical, where there are some decisions and some things that happen in the third act where it seems like they sort of happen because they want to have this plot point down, a few scenes later, and in order for that to happen, they need this to happen and this character to be at this place. And so there are some stuff that I think because of sort of cutting some corners and some decisions that just didn't make sense, some of those payoffs don't land maybe quite as good as they could have. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this film, there is quite a bit of profanity in this film. I think potentially 1 to 2 F-bombs. I'll admit, I had a hard time hearing clearly them spoken in the film. I think there's one that's spoken and then it's repeated later. I don't know if they're fully articulated. This is a PG-13 film, which means you can only get one F word. So I don't know if for sure, but I think that 1 or 2 are probably in there. But kind of beyond that, there is a fair amount of just sort of other profanities, mostly starting with the letter S, that are sort of sprinkled all throughout this film. And then there also, I think, Jesus and God are each used at least once as well. As far as violence, there is kind of plenty of sort of wartime violence characters, and then these AI simulants get shot or exploded in kind of in battle. Characters sort of get like bloodied from their face. So really nothing gratuitous as far as sort of blood goes. Probably the most kind of graphic violence in this film isn't necessarily depicted on screen, but it is a soldier implies that he is going to cut off the face of a deceased enemy in order to use that face for like a facial recognition scan, and presumably he does, because next you see they're through the door, but you don't actually see the gruesome act depicted, but obviously the implications of that are quite violent. As far as sexuality, really nothing here either. There are kind of 2 different but very similar scenes in this film where women or else like AI simulants that have a female appearance are shown sort of dancing suggestively like in a nightclub, although they're fully clothed. And in the instance of the latter scene, they're robots. They're not even human characters, and it's also sort of in like a hazy hologram. So it's more suggestive than anything itself that's depicted. And there's also another scene in like an AI simulate creation factory where they're creating these AI beings, and there's some females being created, and you do sort of see essentially that they're nude, and you see the shape of the breasts and stuff, but it's very obviously that these aren't humans. It's more presented in like a mechanical manufacture, like the creation of a doll, rather than anything that comes across as like intentionally sexual. Maybe one other content thing is this sort of spirituality. We'll get into a bit more in a second with sort of some of the themes, but there is quite a bit of sort of spiritual stuff going on all throughout. There's sort of a lot of it related more to like kind of Eastern religions, but there is kind of several conversations like about heaven, kind of who gets to go to heaven and who doesn't get to go to heaven, and which in the context of the film is good people go to heaven, bad people don't go to heaven, or else humans can go to heaven but AIs can't go to heaven. So there is a lot of sort of discussions. And I think in one scene a character's shown praying to Jesus, and so there are sort of religious or spiritual either conversations or like imagery all throughout this film as well. As far as themes, kind of things going on beneath the surface of this, like I said, there is some interesting stuff going on, although I don't think they ever get quite as deep into it as maybe they could have. This probably is more of like an action sci-fi rather than like a more heady intellectual, Star Trek-y sort of sci-fi in that sense. But probably the main theme is sort of related just to the name of this movie, The Creator, and kind of the question of, what does it mean to be created, and how much does the creation sort of reflect the creator? Because there's a really fascinating conversation between sort of the main human character and then this sort of child AI character. And again, I don't know the phrase verbatim, but essentially the child character asks the AI, asks the human, says, if someone created AI like me, then who created you? And kind of immediately after that question, the camera flashes to show like some monkeys walking sort of in the background of the scene, and they appear elsewhere as well, before going back to the human's character who eventually just sort of says, my mom and my dad. And obviously, I think the cutaway to these monkeys is intentionally there to sort of imply, or at least, bring in like evolution, that that no one, unlike the AI, no one created humans. We sort of evolved by chance. But it is interesting that Joshua, the human character, essentially can't answer the question. He does sort of avoid answering that question. And kind of in this scene, and then sort of in some other moments throughout the film, does sort of suggest, or at least raise the possibility that, just as AI kind of self-evidently has a creator, so too must humans. Kind of building off that premise, the film also showcases kind of our innate desire to worship our creator, because the AI, the simulates in this film, have developed their own kind of religious beliefs, and they very much honor and praise and kind of worship the creator of AI as sort of their god. And there's even a scene of essentially an AI priest who's sort of preaching to these children, and it talks about that there's going to be a coming savior that will set them free and allow them to sort of live in this bliss, this paradise, and kind of live at peace with the humans. And obviously, from a Christian perspective, the god for these AIs is immortal. It's not our deity. It's just something that the film itself makes very clear, and like the religion itself isn't consistent with Christianity. But I do think it reflects a lot of biblical truth, just as Christians, that hey, creation needs a creator, and that it's sort of a natural desire of that which is created to worship that creator. So I do think there's some interesting themes there for Christians to think through. So in the end, I had high expectations for this film, and for the most part, those expectations were met. I really enjoyed this film. I had some nitpicks about some of the kind of contrived plot elements in the third act of things that just seemed forced to try and make the story work rather than feeling organic. But for the most part, this is just an effective film. It's a film that looks gorgeous, has a compelling story, and I think even more so, it feels fresh. It feels something like this isn't just another sequel. This is sort of the type of movie it seems that a lot of people have felt is missing from Hollywood. So I do hope people go check this movie out, and that we get more of these types of films. But hey, let me know what you guys think. If you guys check out this movie, let me know if you enjoy it, what you sort of thought of some of the themes and the stuff going on, or if I missed anything happening in this movie. Would love to have a conversation with you about that. If you haven't done so, I encourage you guys to subscribe to the channel, become a Collider. Would love to have you be a part of what we're doing here with movie reviews and live streams and just other fun stuff. So hope you will join us with that. But most of all, guys, thanks for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.